On the afternoon of December 26, 1900, a lighthouse tender called the Hesperus reached a group of rocks in the North Atlantic. The crew expected 3 men to be waiting for them. No flag flew from the lighthouse. No supplies had been brought down to the landing. When the ship sounded its whistle, nobody answered. Captain James Harvey tried again. He sounded the siren, then fired a rocket over the island. Still nothing. Joseph Moore, the relief keeper, climbed into a boat and made for the eastern landing. The sea was rough enough that he had to jump onto the rock. From there, a steep path led toward the lighthouse. The gate was closed. The outside doors were closed. Inside, the kitchen door stood open. The fire had been cold for days. Moore checked the bedrooms and found the beds empty. He climbed to the light room. The lamp had been cleaned. Its oil fountain was full. The machinery was ready. The lighthouse was not abandoned in panic. It had simply stopped having people in it. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall and Donald McArthur were gone. No body was ever recovered. The Flannan Isles lie roughly 20 miles west of the Isle of Lewis in Scotland's Outer Hebrides. Sailors sometimes called them the Seven Hunters. They are not gentle islands. Their cliffs rise straight out of the Atlantic, and landing on them can be difficult even in decent weather. The largest island is Island Moor. It has no harbour, no village, and no protected bay. Before the lighthouse, people from Lewis visited to graze sheep and collect seabirds. Stone ruins on the island were linked in local tradition with St. Flannan. By the end of the 19th century, the reason for occupying Island Moor was more practical. Ships needed a light. The Northern Lighthouse Board approved construction in 1896. Engineer David Allen Stevenson designed the station, and contractor George Lawson built it. The work took years. Stone, fuel, machinery and men all had to be moved onto an island that resisted being approached. The completed tower stood 23 meters high. Since it sat near the summit, the light was more than 100 meters above the sea. It first shone on December 7, 1899. Almost exactly 1 year later, 3 of its keepers disappeared. There were landing places on both sides of Island Moor. Each had rock cut steps and a small tramway used to haul supplies. The eastern landing was safer under some conditions. The western landing was exposed to the full force of the Atlantic. That distinction matters. Nearly every physical clue was found in the west. There was no radio at the station in 1900. If the keepers needed assistance, they displayed signals from poles near the lighthouse balcony. On Lewis, a gamekeeper named Roderick Mackenzie was paid to watch for them. Fog and distance often hid the island for days, so a missing light did not produce an immediate rescue. James Ducat was the principal keeper. He was experienced, trusted by the board, and had helped prepare the station before it opened. Thomas Marshall was the second assistant. Donald McArthur was an occasional keeper, filling in for William Ross, who was away on sick leave. These were working men, not characters in a ghost story. Their days followed a routine. The lens and machinery had to be cleaned. Oil had to be handled carefully. Weather readings were recorded. Meals were cooked. Equipment at the landings had to be checked because the next relief ship might depend on it. The shift system also mattered. A lighthouse was not supposed to be left unattended. Yet when the men vanished, all 3 appear to have been outside. That breach of routine is one reason the case still feels unresolved. It is tempting to imagine tension inside the tower. 3 men, bad weather, little privacy. Later writers did exactly that. But the surviving official record contains no evidence of a quarrel, violence or fear among them. Superintendent Robert Muirhead knew the keepers personally. He described Ducat and Marshall as 2 of the board's most efficient men and McArthur as a competent, occasional keeper. On December 7, 1900, Muirhead visited Island Moor during a routine relief. He spoke with Ducat about the station's signalling system, shook hands with the men, and left. He later wrote that he had the melancholy recollection of being the last person known to have said goodbye to them. The last completed entries in the station log were dated December 13th. That fact has inspired a famous set of supposed diary entries, but we will come back to those. The real record is less theatrical. Information for December 14th and the morning of December 15th had been written on a slate, ready to be copied into the formal log. It included the time the light was extinguished, barometer and thermometer readings, and the state of the wind at 9 in the morning. The lamp was cleaned, its oil containers were filled. The lens and machinery had been attended to. Pots and pans were clean, and the kitchen had been tidied. Muirhead believed the normal morning work had been finished. Sometime that afternoon, the routine broke. At midnight on December 15th, the steamer Archivist passed the Flannan Isles. Captain Holman later gave a signed statement that he could not see the light, though he believed he should have seen it. This places the disappearance, or at least the failure of the light, before midnight. The report did not reach the Northern Lighthouse Board in time to trigger a rescue. The scheduled relief was then delayed by bad weather. 11 days passed between the last morning readings and the arrival of the Hesperus. That gap is uncomfortable, but it is not evidence of a conspiracy. It reflects the limits of communication in 1900. The island had no wireless set. Visibility from Lewis was unreliable. A ship at sea could notice a dark lighthouse and still be unable to speak with the people responsible for it until reaching port. Moore's letter, written on December 28th, gives us the closest thing to a first-person account of the discovery. He wrote that the usual flag was missing. The ship's horn received no reply. After landing, he found the gate and outer doors closed. In the kitchen, the fire had not been lit for several days. The beds were empty. He did not spend long searching on his first visit because, in his words, he only too well knew something serious had occurred. Moore ran back to the landing and brought other men up to confirm what he had seen. They searched the station and checked the light room. Nothing there explained the disappearance. Captain Harvey could not simply leave the lighthouse dark. Moore returned to the island with Buoymaster Alan MacDonald and 2 seamen, Campbell and Lamont. That evening they lit the lamp at the proper time. Imagine that first watch. The machinery turned. The lens sent its beam over the Atlantic again. Somewhere on the island, 3 sets of living quarters remained empty, and nobody yet knew whether their occupants had died hours earlier or more than a week before. The next day, Moore and the others searched Eileen Moor from end to end. They found no trace of the men. At the eastern landing, everything appeared normal. The ropes remained coiled in their shelter as they had been after the December 7th relief. The western side looked different. A wooden box used to store mooring and landing ropes had been torn from a crevice. It had been secured about 70 feet up the tramway from its lower end, roughly 110 feet above sea level. The ropes were scattered near the crane platform, but the coils had not been opened. That detail suggests the keepers had not been using them when they disappeared. Iron railings were displaced and twisted. A stone weighing more than a ton had been moved from higher ground and left on the concrete path. A life buoy had vanished. Fragments of its canvas remained attached to the ropes that had held it, as if water had ripped the buoy away without anyone untying it. The crane itself was secure. Its jib had been lowered, and the wire rope remained covered and tied down. Muirhead found no sign that the keepers had been operating it. The clothing inside the station offered one more clue. Ducat's sea boots and waterproof were missing. Marshall's sea boots and oilskins were missing. MacArthur's usual outer coat remained behind. Moore said the men wore that equipment when they went down toward the landings. Ducat and Marshall had dressed for exposed work. McArthur may have rushed outside in his shirt sleeves. That is the evidence. A damaged western landing. 2 men dressed to go outside. A third man's coat left behind. No bodies. No witness. Muirhead reached Island Moor on December 29th and inspected the site himself. Heavy seas prevented him from descending all the way to the western landing, but he reached the crane platform and examined the damage. His conclusion was direct. The 3 men had probably gone toward the west landing to secure the rope box or inspect storm damage. An unexpectedly large wave rose above them, then swept back down the rock with enough force to carry them into the sea. Muirhead also considered whether the wind had blown them from the island. He rejected it. The wind came from the west and would have pushed the men uphill, giving them a chance to drop to the ground before reaching the opposite edge. The sea explanation fits the physical evidence better. It accounts for the missing box, twisted rails, displaced stone and torn lifebuoy. It also explains why no bodies remained on the island. Still, one question survives. Why did all 3 men go outside? Perhaps Ducat and Marshall went down together. Then McArthur saw trouble and ran to help. Perhaps all 3 believed the equipment was in immediate danger. Marshall has sometimes been linked to an earlier find for equipment lost in bad weather, which might have made him anxious to secure the gear. That detail is interesting, but it is not enough to reconstruct the men's exact choices. The official report tells us what most likely killed them. It cannot tell us the order in which it happened. The height sounds impossible until the geography is considered. The report did not claim that a neat, vertical wave travelled across open water with a crest 110 feet high. Waves striking steep rock can run far above the level of their original crest. Water is funneled upward, breaks against ledges and then falls back with tremendous force. Modern instruments have confirmed that individual waves can rise far above the surrounding sea state. Sailors had described such waves for centuries, though scientists once treated many accounts with suspicion. Island Moor did not need a supernatural wave. It needed one badly timed surge at an exposed landing. The moved stone and damaged ironwork are harder evidence than any tale told later. Something powerful reached that path, but reasonable does not mean proven. The sea erased the final minutes. Muirhead arrived 2 weeks after the likely accident, and weather continued to strike the island in the meantime. Some damage may have occurred after the men vanished. We cannot place each object at a precise minute on December 15th. That uncertainty is small, but it is real. You may have heard a more disturbing version. In that version, Moore finds an uneaten meal on the table. One chair lies overturned, as if the men fled in terror. The logbook describes a violent storm while the sea around the island is supposedly calm. One keeper cries, another becomes silent. The men pray. The last entry reads, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." It is a great ghost story. It is also not in the official documents. Moore said the kitchen was tidy. He did not report an abandoned meal or overturned chair. Muirhead wrote that the morning work was complete. The supposed emotional diary entries do not appear in the surviving official account. Some atmospheric details entered the popular version through Wilfred Wilson Gibson's poem Flannan Isle, published in 1912. The poem is literature, not testimony. A more elaborate false log appeared in later sensational writing and was repeated so often that it began to look like a primary source. This is how a mystery changes. A clean kitchen is not dramatic enough, so it becomes a meal interrupted. A missing crew is not eerie enough, so one man must have been crying. Repetition does the rest. The false details also weaken the real story. They turn 3 working men into props and distract from the evidence on the western cliff. Without bodies, almost any theory can be made to sound possible for a few minutes. One man could have attacked the others, then taken his own life. There is no physical evidence of violence inside the station, no reported blood, and no documented conflict serious enough to support that idea. The men could have left voluntarily. Yet they had no suitable means of vanishing from a bare island in winter, and abandoning the light would have thrown away their jobs, wages, and families. Their outdoor clothing also points toward work near the landing, not escape. A foreign vessel, smugglers, or a sea creature could have taken them. Again, no evidence. Folklore adds ghosts, sea spirits, and the supposed curse of Saint Flannan. Those stories belong to the cultural life of the islands, but they cannot explain twisted iron, missing equipment, and work clothes. The strongest alternative is not really an alternative at all. It changes the sequence. Ducat and Marshall may have gone to the west landing first. McArthur stayed in the tower, as procedure required. When the others failed to return, he ran out without his coat and was caught by the same sea or by a second wave. That would explain the clothing. It would also preserve the rule that someone initially remained at the station. The problem is timing. We cannot know how long McArthur waited or what he saw. Official paperwork continued after the search ended. The records include questions about wages, insurance, pensions, and payments to the families. Mrs. Ducat and Mrs. McArthur were widowed. Thomas Marshall's father later pursued a claim connected with the loss of his son. This part is easy to lose beneath the mystery. The keepers did not simply disappear from a locked room in a puzzle book. They disappeared from families who had to live with an official conclusion, but no grave. The Northern Lighthouse Board kept the station operating. Later, keepers returned to the same rooms and maintained the same light. Eilean Moor remained staffed until 1971, when the lighthouse became automatic. The lamp still shines. The mystery survives because the final event happened beyond observation, not because the evidence points toward the impossible. The last reliable picture of December 15th is ordinary. The lamp had been serviced. The kitchen was clean. Weather readings waited on a slate. Then something drew at least 2 men toward the western landing. The sea had already torn equipment from a place 110 feet above its normal level. Ducat and Marshall put on their sea gear. McArthur's coat stayed inside. Before midnight, the light was dark. The official explanation is probably right. A large surge struck the cliff while the men tried to protect the landing equipment, and the Atlantic took all 3. Probably is the word that keeps the case open. We have reports, measurements, and damaged iron. We do not have a witness. We do not know who stepped outside first, who followed, or whether anyone had time to understand what was happening. The real Flannan mystery is quieter than the legend. No supernatural diary, no meal frozen in time, just a maintained lighthouse, an empty station, and 3 experienced men who made one decision the record cannot recover. I am Archivist Nox. This case remains unfinished.